All right, I know that my time is limited, and I know that I hardly ever have time at the end for questions and answers. And one of these days, there'll be like 30 seconds for one question at the end. So we'll see. But I know that the bell is waiting. So we'll go ahead and get started, and let's start with a prayer, and then I'll share more with you. Dear Father, we thank you that we can come together this morning. We thank you for blessing us to be not only redeemed and saved, not only rescued from sin and darkness, but that you give us work to do in your family and in your kingdom, that you have called us your co-workers, and that you see the value in us, that you have given us purpose. Lord, thank you for all this, and thank you for the way you put us together so that we can work together, so that we can do more for your kingdom. And I'm excited to share about that this morning. So thank you, Father, for all that you're doing in us and around us today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. I'm just going to jump right into it. I'm Rob Hindman. My wife, Denise, just came in. And so here's a picture of us. We're some of your missionaries. For those of you who are new to Shallowater, new to this congregation, and we have partnered together for 11 years, something like that, 12 years. We were originally missionaries. Well, I'll get to that in a second, but first, here's who we are. Malachi is 17, Silas is 15, and Ezra is 11. Eden is our only girl, who's 9. Asa is 7. Cephas is 5. And on my lap is Zadok, who's 1, closer to 2 these days, but he's still 1. Malachi is about to turn 18, and Ezra is about to turn 12, but that's our current ages right now. I know that wasn't necessary. Those of you who know us have all the kids' names memorized, and you already knew all that. I know, but it's for the new people, okay? But seriously, I want to pause and say how much I appreciate and admire those of you who have had us into your homes. And I know not everybody can do that, and it wasn't the right week for everybody, but of course, those of you who have, there's a special type of courage to having a family of 9 over for dinner, okay? So I recognize that this is not just that couple with 1 or 2 kids, So thank you for your hospitality. It really means a lot to us. Our previous work, like I was mentioning, we've been partnered with 12th Street for 12 years. We were missionaries in Kharkiv, Ukraine from 2008 to 2014. I'll come back to that in a moment. We left in 2014. We were here for a year or more, transitioning in between, and then we went in 2015 to Reno, Nevada. In both of those places, we were doing church planting work, helping new congregations get established and started and matured. And so we finished that up in Reno last year. We were here for a visit briefly in November last year, or October, somewhere in that time frame, as we were hurrying over to Slovakia, trying to get everything ready for that. And now we are in Košice, Slovakia. So let me tell you a little bit about the work we're doing now. We kind of previewed it for you last year when we were here. But the need arose because we were missionaries in Ukraine, as I mentioned. Even after we left Ukraine and went to Reno, we stayed as connected as we could to the Ukrainian brethren, to the churches there, to the works there. We would even go back and visit every couple of years to encourage that church plant and all of our contacts in Ukraine, even non-Christians, we would go back and see sometimes. So we stayed really connected. And then, what happened in 2022, this full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine. And that just created a whole new set of needs, a whole new kind of chaos, a whole new kind of purpose to our connection to the kingdom in Ukraine. At first we were working from Reno and staying in the work we were in, and I was also involved in connecting stateside humanitarian donations with Ukrainian needs. And so I was doing that for several months, the spring and summer of 2022. And during that time, we got an invitation from a former coworker of ours, when we were in Kharkiv. So back in 2008 to 2014, we were in Kharkiv. We were not working alone. We were part of a mission team with 3 other families. One of those families stayed in Ukraine the whole time up until the present. They were in Kharkiv longer than all the rest of us. And then he became the president of Ukrainian Bible Institute. So that family's Brandon and Katie Price. So I'll be mentioning them several times. Brandon is now the president of Ukrainian Bible Institute, which is it's a sunset-connected preacher training school in Ukraine, but not just for preachers, for men and women who want to be of service in the kingdom and serve their congregations, teach classes, whatever they want to do. It's a Bible education program. I even was a guest teacher for it back when we lived in Kharkiv. I taught one class as I had opportunity. Meanwhile, Brandon became the president of Ukrainian Bible Institute. At that time, it was located in Kyiv, and it was a classroom program, just like you would expect. The students lived in Kyiv. They came Monday through Friday to the Institute for classes. They went home to do their homework. When the war came, the whole thing got scattered. I mean, everything in Ukraine got disrupted and scattered, and UBI was no exception to that. And so many of the students fled to Poland or other countries for safety. Some of our faculty and staff did the same. And Brandon and Katie themselves were in Poland after the war started. And so UBI had to go all online. It could no longer be a classroom program. It could no longer be a brick and mortar thing. And so everything was different. Everything was new, a whole new set of challenges. And so Brandon invited us to come join the staff, come work alongside him to help navigate this. How is UBI going to not only survive this, how is it going to thrive? How can we thrive in this setting when everything is disrupted, when nothing is the way it used to be? But Brandon and I, as we talked about it, we were very aware that this was not only a challenge to UBI, this was also an opportunity, because nothing could stay the same. There was no longer any excuse for saying, well, this is how we've always done it, so that's how we'll do it. We couldn't do it the way we'd always done it. And so we looked at it from the framework of, if UBI did not exist, if there had been no Church of Christ preacher training school in Ukraine up until now, and we were starting it from scratch, what would we want it to be? And so it was kind of an exciting opportunity to say, hey, everything's on the drawing board, everything's on the table. What do we want to build here? So that's sort of the need and the purpose. My role in all this is to, number one, work alongside Brandon, navigating this and trying to make decisions and planning and administration through all this process. Number two is to teach classes. I'm an instructor along with the other instructors on the faculty. And number three is to do the website and technical side of things, which many of you know that's been, sort of I worked full-time as a webmaster before we went to Ukraine, and the whole time we've been on the field, everywhere we've been, I've continued to do website and technical things along the side, either for the purposes of our work or just to partially self-support ourselves when we needed to for some side income. And so Brandon asked if I could come and rebuild a whole new Ukrainian Bible Institute website, make it much bigger than just a website, but also a learning management system, which some of you in education know exactly what that is, where an online platform for interaction between the teacher and the students and all the different class formats, interaction between the students, sharing of documents, turning in assignments, taking tests, all that has to be online. So that's the role that we have entered into. But the question in all that was, but hold on, isn't Ukraine in the middle of a war? And so where are we going to live exactly? We're going to go into Ukraine to do this work? And the answer is no. No, we're not going to try to go into Ukraine to do this. Because even if we wanted to, and there was a big part of us that did want to, but even if we wanted to, so much of Ukraine the past year has been without electricity, without internet, sometimes without running water. And we realized it might sound noble to be in Ukraine to do this work, but it's not very practical. If we want to actually do this work, we're going to have electricity and internet, and maybe live in a more stable, safe place. So we and the Price family came to a decision together about, here's a place we need to go to do this. So let me show you. So here's Europe. There's Ukraine. And that yellow circle, if you can see that, that's Kharkiv. That's where we lived before. And so it's way on the other side, eastern Ukraine. Eastern Ukraine was and is, but probably will not be for very long, Russian speaking. And so when we lived over there, we learned the Russian language. That's what everybody used on the street. We only used the Ukrainian language if we were dealing with the government, you know. But for conversation, it was all Russian. So we learned Russian. But the downside of that is, look how close we are to Russia. And that became a big issue here last year. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Kharkiv was among the cities that was the easiest targets because of how close it was to the border. And I'll actually be sharing some more about that in the sermon this morning. All these green countries are the countries where the majority of Ukrainian refugees went after the war started. So you see they went all over Europe, not everywhere, but not so much to Scandinavia, but all over Central and Eastern Europe and some Western Europe as well. And right in the middle of that, you see that yellow country, that's Slovakia. So if we zoom in on that, we chose to go live in Slovakia for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's close to Ukraine. It's right there. It's bordering Ukraine, but it's bordering the safer side of Ukraine. The further east you go, the more dangerous it is in Ukraine. So Slovakia is over there on the western tip of Ukraine. And then number two, it's a safe, stable place to be. It's a NATO country, part of the European Union. And it's, nothing is happening there as far as conflict. People have been asking us, have you heard any explosions? They're like, no, not even close. I mean, their everyday life is very normal, very boring there, honestly. Everything is just as plain as can be. And so that red circle there is Košice, where we're living. Now, I know the Halamacheks were here not very long ago, right, for a visit. And so you've probably seen this map already. You know your Slovakia geography. But they are on the opposite side. They're on the western tip of Slovakia, bordering Austria and Bratislava. So our red circle from where they live is about a 6-hour drive. I actually have not yet been to Bratislava myself. So I'm sure we'll cross paths with them here before long. But that's where we are. We're on opposite sides of Slovakia from each other. That's the city we live in. The Slovak language is related to Russian. That's been nice. We recognize some words. A lot of words are similar, if not identical. But Slovak language uses our alphabet, the English alphabet, whereas the Russian language uses the Cyrillic alphabet. And you might look at that and say, well, that doesn't look exactly like our alphabet. And you're right. It's like our alphabet with some of the letters are wearing crowns. It's like our alphabet, but it's royalty, And so that S is not an S. It's a sh when it has the crown over it. And that C is not our C. It's a Slovak C, which is pronounced like a TS. So the C says ts, all in one letter, like TS. So you put that together, that says Košice, that word. If you remember sheets, that'll help you to remember how to pronounce this. So just remember the sheets on your bed or the sheets of paper in your printer, and that'll help give you an easier time remembering how to say that city where the Hindmans are. Oh yeah, Košice, okay? So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking to you about, well, what happened since we were here last? Because I told you some of that already when I was here last, before we moved. Now we get to tell you, how did the move go, and what did it look like? And so we'll concentrate on that, and then about how the work has started after we got settled. But first of all, we had to get there. So that's us in front of the Dallas-Fort Worth International Terminal. Us and our people and our luggage and our dog. That's everything that got on the plane with us. It was thankfully the travel went smoothly. We didn't miss any connections. All the luggage showed up. The dog even made it, and we got there. These are the kids on the plane after we forced them to turn off the movies and say, get some sleep. And we're about to do this again next week, and I'm already dreading it because they'll say, what about one more movie? No, turn it off. Lay down, try to sleep. And so they did. They don't always look this orderly when they're sleeping on an airplane. I think probably this lasted about 15 minutes before one of them was in the other one's lap. This is the Budapest airport where we arrived. We didn't fly into Košice because of the dog. The dog was too big. He had to fly in this big crate. And in order to take a dog in a big crate, you have to have a bigger airplane than they fly into Košice, where we live. So we had to fly into Budapest. It's a 2.5-hour drive. And a couple of the men from the congregation in Košice came down with 2 big vans, picked us up, everything fit, and we drove back up into Slovakia. This was us the first morning after we arrived. We stayed in an Airbnb. We didn't yet know where we would live. We had started looking online before we left the U.S. And weren't finding much. It was a little startling because we had been told several months earlier, oh yeah, there's a good amount of houses to rent here. But that was before Russia started attacking Ukraine's energy grid. That all happened in the fall last year. And when that happened, a bunch more Ukrainian refugees came out of Ukraine into other countries. They said, I want to be somewhere that has heat, please, as winter comes. And so by the time we got there in November, the rental market was all soaked up with Ukrainian refugees, which is good. I'm glad they had a place to stay. You know, better that they have a warm place to stay. But it meant that the amount of houses left to rent for us to choose from was very minimal. I mean, it was very slim pickings. And it was looking for a while like we were going to have, in order to find a house big enough for us and with a landlord willing to rent to a family of 9 Americans, that we might have to live in some village far out of town, don't even have public transport to get into town, and we didn't have a car at the time, and it was not looking very good. But after about a week and a half or 2 weeks, a house popped up. I was sitting there, you know, in vain, hitting refresh on the rental websites in Slovakia, and there's a new one. I couldn't believe my eyes. And so we had our friends call about it, and we went and looked at it the next morning. We had to ride public transportation while we were doing this process of looking at houses. So that's us riding on one of the, it's called a tram. It's like a above ground, you know, local train. Had to get around town that way because we didn't yet have a vehicle of our own. And this is the house we finally found. And thankfully it's in the city. It's close to public transportation. We can walk just a couple minutes and get on the bus, or walk a few more minutes and get on the tram and be in the center of the city, or I can take the tram to the church building for work or whatever. It's a big enough house for us, and the landlord sort of reluctantly agreed to let us rent it. You know, even though there's 9 of us, even though we're Americans, you might think, wouldn't he want to rent to Americans? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. Because there's a big U.S. Steel factory there. It's this company, U.S. Steel. They're the biggest employer in Košice. They have a huge factory just outside of town. And so because it's a U.S. company, they have a lot of American employees over the years that have come through and rented houses. And unfortunately, they have not left a good reputation for Americans as far as how they take care of rentals that they rent. They leave them, unfortunately, trashed in some cases. And so the fact that we were Americans was actually a strike against us. But thankfully, this landlord reluctantly agreed, and that's where we're living now. There was a couple of big issues. Number one, there's no yard for our dog, just this paved driveway. Number two, this house came completely unfurnished. And that's unusual there. I know that's the norm here, but in Eastern Europe, rentals are always furnished. I mean, always, except for this one. This one had been used by a business before, the previous tenants were a business, and when the business moved out, everything came out, and so it was completely empty. It had a good kitchen, we didn't have to, buy a stove or anything like that, but we did have to buy a washer dryer and all the furniture. We even had to buy the mirrors for the bathrooms. There were no mirrors, so we had not planned for that. We had gone over there thinking, we know Eastern Europe. We're not going to have to furnish an apartment or a house. Well, we were wrong. And so that made our settling process longer and more expensive. But thankfully, the Lord had blessed us, and we had raised more one-time support than we thought we needed. And we kind of thought at the time, what are we going to do with this one-time support? We'll have to find some way to use it. And this turned out, okay, the Lord knew what he was doing, because we had to furnish this whole house. This is our first night in the house. We moved in on Thanksgiving Day. And it was Thanksgiving Day to us, but to everybody else in the whole city of Košice, it was just Thursday, because it's nothing. It's not a holiday there. So we had nobody to have Thanksgiving with because everybody else was coming home from their jobs, tired, doing work, school, etc. There were no Americans yet. Our coworkers, Brandon and Katie Price, were still in the U.S. They came in January. And the house was not set up or furnished when we were just moving all of our stuff into it that day. So we didn't even have a working kitchen yet. And so our Thanksgiving dinner was takeout hamburgers. That's what you see there. And everything in the picture is borrowed. That's a borrowed table from the church building and borrowed furniture behind us from church members. So we had to build a lot of furniture. We got a lot secondhand, whenever we could find a good deal on the sort of the Slovak equivalent of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. But whatever we couldn't find for a good deal secondhand, we ordered from IKEA, and then we had to build it ourselves. So Malachi there did a lot of the furniture construction for us, and Cephas is there helping him as well. And then winter came too. And so, like I said, we moved in on Thanksgiving, and right about the second week of December, this happened. And it was a pretty good one. I mean, it was a nice snowfall, beautiful, winter wonderland. This is our street, by the way. That sort of stone fence on the far right side of the picture is the front of our house. That's looking down the street there. And we didn't yet have a vehicle. We were borrowing Brandon and Katie's car, but we couldn't drive it in this. And so we had to walk in the snow, and we realized, we knew it, but we had not had time to buy winter boots for everybody. Some people had boots and some people didn't. And for some reason, we ended up in Slovakia without my coat or Malachi's coat. They got left behind in the hustle bustle of our packing. We just pulled them out of the Holland's closet, actually, yesterday. So I'm taking my coat back with me to this time. So we had to go out in the snow and try to get ourselves ready for the snow. So this is some of the kids. I took them to this sporting goods store, but funny enough, to get from the bus stop to the sporting goods store to buy boots, we had to walk through this field of snow. That's not completely true. We could have gone around it, but we wanted to walk through it. So finally, in February, our shipment came. And I told you about this last year when we were here. We shipped 3 pallets of stuff from our home in Reno before we sold it. And it was not very clear how soon it would get there. We just knew we found a good deal, and it was going to go by ship, and it was going to take a while. But we were hoping, it got picked up in October, like October 17th or something. And so we were hoping it should be there by Christmas. And it'd be nice to have some of this stuff back by Christmas so that we can, have our pots. All of Denise's pots and pans are in those things. Most everything for our kitchen was in there, in addition to lots of books and games and toys and all kinds of stuff that we shipped to ourselves. Well, Christmas came and we had no shipment. And in fact, about Christmas time, it was still sitting in the port in Houston. And so we were like, oh, great, how long is this going to take? And kind of cursing the shipping company because of this. And so January came, still, by January it was on the boat, but still no decent ETA of when we could actually expect it. First week of February, we finally got word that our shipment has arrived in Bratislava and it has to go through customs. And I asked the guy, oh no, am I going to have to pay for customs? Is there going to be some big fees? He said, no, you don't have to pay, but I just need your residency card. And residency, we're immigrants over there. We're not citizens, and so we had to apply for residency, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. We had to apply for residency to stay there longer than 90 days. You can stay as a tourist for 90 days, but we were, needing to stay longer, of course. So we had applied for residency, but we didn't have our cards yet. And here the shipping agent says, I need your residency card in order to get this through customs. I said, I don't have it yet, and I'm not sure when it's going to come. And he said, well, they'll leave it in customs 5 days free of charge, and after that you pay by the day. And I said, oh no. And you know what happened? The next day my residency card came in the mail. So, and thankfully we didn't need everybody's, just mine was enough, because Denise's and the kids' residencies took a lot longer. They didn't get theirs until April or May. But mine came the very next day, and then we were thinking, thank you, Lord, that our pallets did not come in December, because how much would we have been paying? They would have been sitting in Bratislava December, January, and we have been paying by the day. So now we look back and say, okay, Lord, it's okay. Thank you for delaying our shipment. So this is what it looked like after we pulled them all off those pallets and unloaded all the boxes. That's our garage full of boxes, and it was like Christmas in February. Meanwhile, like I just mentioned, we were applying for residency, and this was one of the questions on the residency application. And I had to call a sister in the congregation who was kind of helping me through this process as our translator. What am I supposed to put here? She said, just put 6. We'll sort it out later. And so thankfully they did let all 7 children into the country. So we filled out all these applications. It was literally hours of time on the computer filling out all these digital applications. We had to make one appointment per person. Couldn't do it all with one appointment, of course. And so we ended up all day at this is called the Foreign Police. It's sort of the equivalent of, I don't know, where do they go in the United States for immigration, whatever the government agency is. And so we were there all day. We were leaving after most of the employees. That's how long it took to get through all of our stuff. But that's us outside after all of our long day of appointments. That was in January. At that time, we thought, great, we should have all of our cards, pretty quick, because we got them all applied for in January. And then we got letters in the mail a couple weeks later saying, actually, we need this additional document, all these additional things for everybody except me. Like I said, I got my card pretty quick just for the pallets for that shipment. Denise and the kids, we had to ship off for additional documents from Austin, Texas, the Secretary of State, from Carson City, Nevada, called apostils, if you're familiar with what those are. It's a government document that says this birth certificate was issued by the legitimate authority that's supposed to be able to issue this, so that Slovaks can look at it and say, okay, this is actually a real American birth certificate. We had to wait for all that stuff, and that's why Denise and the kids didn't get their residency until April and May. Meanwhile, though, we felt a little bit like prisoners. We had to give up some of our freedom for this because while we were waiting for our residencies, we could not leave Slovakia. And I don't know what would have happened if we had to. Denise and I were thinking, what happens if one of our parents has a health crisis? What happens if there's a death in the family and we're not allowed to leave Slovakia? Or if we do, I don't know if they'll let us back in, What do we do? And thankfully, nothing like that came up. Thank you, Lord. But it was a weird feeling to feel kind of confined like that. Like we came to Slovakia looking forward to it. We want to live in Slovakia. And now Slovakia feels like it's our prison cell. We can't leave. But once our residency cards came, then we did have that freedom again. There was a couple more steps after the residency cards arrived. And one of those is you have to go to a Slovak doctor and have them check you and make sure that you're healthy. Make sure that you don't have some terrible disease that you're going to infect all the rest of the people in your city with. And I think it's really funny that they make you do this after they grant you your residency. Like, don't you want to know that before you give me the card? But anyway, we had to go do all that. It was another long process with blood draws, and you don't want to hear about it all. But we got that all done. Meanwhile, in the course of all this that I've been describing, we were fellowshipping and worshiping with the church there week to week. Now, like I said at the beginning, we didn't go, this is not a church planting work like we did in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and in Reno, Nevada. We went to work with Ukrainian Bible Institute. So our work is mainly with Ukrainians, and our work is mainly online. But we're living in Slovakia. There's a congregation there. In fact, we chose Košice because of the congregation there, and because it's only an hour and a half from the Ukrainian border when we need to go in. But there's a congregation there that we had some connections to already, and I went and visited it back in August before we made our decision to go. And the congregation was very welcoming, supportive. They said, we'd love for you to come. And we'll even let you use space in our church building for your offices, for me and Brandon. And so they were very inviting, and that was very good. So that's part of why we went. So these are three of the members of the congregation there. All three of those in the picture speak English, and that's really nice. A lot of the brothers and sisters speak either decent or very good English. But there are those who speak virtually none as well. So we've been getting to know the church. This is our Sunday church assembly. It's a small congregation. Before we arrived, it was somewhere in the 16, 18 person range. So when we came, and then when the prices came, almost doubled the congregation. And they of course are glad that we're there. I didn't know, because we didn't know each other very well. They didn't know me very well, or my background, or too well. So I didn't know, are they going to want me to preach at some time? Are they going to be willing to let me help with the preaching? I just didn't assume anything. Like Jesus says, you take the last seat at the table and let them invite you to the front. Say, no, come sit up here. So I didn't ask to preach or anything like that. So we flew in on November 9th, I believe it was, and November 10th or 11th, they invited me to preach. So, that brother at the front there in the picture, the one at the podium, he's been doing all the preaching. They don't have a paid preacher. It's just the brother who is willing and able to preach does it. And he's been doing all the preaching for at least a year or two since the last time there was a missionary there. They have had missionaries working with them as a church, but they don't currently. And so he was more than ready for a break, And so he invited me to preach the first Sunday we were there, and then the second Sunday, and then the third Sunday, and it just went on like that for 13 straight weeks. I preached the first 13 Sundays until our coworker Brandon arrived, and then he was willing to preach too, and finally we were like, okay, let's set up a rotation. So I, Brandon, and Peter, the brother at the front in the picture there, now have a rotation, the three of us. So I'm only preaching once every 3 Sundays now, and that's good. These are a couple of the teen girls spending time with our kids there. This is one of the older ladies actually holding Zadok, and some of you know that's not an easy thing to pull off, that he fell asleep in her arms. We had a hard time, though, and honestly, this is one of our prayer requests. We've had a hard time actually getting to spend time with the church members outside of Sunday. And I know that no congregation in the United States has this problem, right? Members not actually doing anything together outside of Sundays. But man, we really wanted to have the families over for dinner, get our kids together to play, and we have had a very hard time with that. Just over and over, people say, not this week, we're too busy. I'm traveling for work. The kids have exams this week. And this is not like final exams twice a year. It feels like these kids in Slovak schools have some big exam every week, that they have to study for. Too many activities, everybody's too sick, the kids are sick, and it's just we could never get time with people. It was very hard, unless, and we found out this is the secret, unless we needed help. Then they're like, we'll be there in 10 minutes, So it's like we had an electrical problem at the house, and in our rental agreement, we're responsible for minor repairs, So I called one of the brothers and said, hey, I know you do electrical stuff. Do you think you could help me with this? And he was there in a heartbeat, It's like, okay, but can you bring your wife and kids, No, sorry, they got to study, So this picture, though, was our one breakthrough. In the month of May, we had a Ukrainian sister. The one in the red shirt there is a sister from Ukraine. She lives in Poland. She speaks no English or no Slovak, but she came and visited us. She's very close with the Price family. And while she was there, she said that she would be willing to make Ukrainian food for us. And I mean, there's special Ukrainian food that we loved when we lived in Ukraine. You can't get it here. In Slovakia, it's very expensive if you can find it at all. And she said, I'll make it for you. And so we said, great, can we invite the church? And she said, sure. So we hosted this thing in our house, and guess what? The whole church came. I mean, practically, I think there was 2 people out of the church that didn't come. We were like, I guess the secret is also Ukrainian food or something, But man, it was just a blast. It was such a blessing. So at this table, there's, Denise and Katie. There's the Ukrainian sister. Here's Slovak sisters, and they're all working together to make these things called vareniki, this Ukrainian dish. And so that was great. So we got there, we got settled, we got to know the church. Still working on that part. After we finally got all the furniture in the house, then it was finally time that we could start doing the work that we went there to do. So these are Brandon and Katie that I've mentioned several times, our coworkers that work together in Kharkiv. In fact, we've known them for our whole adult lives almost. Katie and I came from the same youth group in California, and Brandon grew up in Reno, Nevada, where we've been working the past 7 years, and we have known his family. In fact, we were working with his parents in Reno. So we're very glad to be with them and their kids. These are a few others of our coworkers, and this is in our home. Back in February, we had a visit from Tim Burrow, the president of Sunset International Bible Institute. That's him next to me. Next to Tim is Natasha Maluga, which is one of our faculty. She teaches women's classes, and she also does a lot of the administration work for the Institute. And on the other side is Richard Baggett, who works with Sunset here, with a lot of the Ukraine humanitarian work that Sunset does. And there's a big partnership between Sunset and UBI, and I'm not really directly involved in it now. I'm focused more on the things I told you I went there to do. But Richard is doing a lot of that humanitarian planning and execution. So anyway, the three of them were on a trip visiting places where they're doing this humanitarian work in Poland, Ukraine, and then they came through Slovakia on their way back to America. And so we got to visit with them. This is our office. Brandon's on the left, I'm on the right. and this is where we do most of our work. I do work from home sometimes when that makes the most sense, but this is our default, working from these two desks, and so this is what it looks like when we're working a lot. This is our chapel time with our students, and everything's on Zoom. And so some of you might see this picture and shudder, from memories from COVID times, But for us, it's not COVID, it's the war has necessitated this. COVID was just sort of like a practice round for Ukraine to get them ready for wartime. So this is what class looks like in wartime, and the squares on this screen are from all over Europe. And we even had a student in Ireland or Northern Ireland. She just graduated, actually. And then we have a student in Germany, several in Poland, and most of our students are still in Ukraine. Told you that bell was coming. This is me teaching a class. I taught my first class in May, a church planting. It was the last class of the school year, the first one that I was up and ready to teach. And I'm teaching the first class in the fall, just in a few weeks here. First week of September, I'm teaching Survey of the Bible. That's our new incoming freshman class. In my church planting class, my main assignment for the students was, if you were to go plant a church somewhere, using the things we're discussing and the ideas I'm giving you in this class, where would you go? And who would you work with? And so it was this long assignment. They had to write this long paper outlining their plans, their time frame, what the church is going to look like as far as where do you think it's going to meet, how are you going to pay for that if it's a rented place, what's going to be your initial evangelistic approach to that community, what's going to be your relationship with other congregations in the area, etc. And so they had to spell all that out. Who are you going to work with? Things like that. So it's all hypothetical. But I told them, make this church planting plan for a place where you actually could do it. So Ukrainian men right now, unless they have some extenuating circumstance, they're not allowed to leave Ukraine. So I said, if you're a Ukrainian brother and you're not allowed to leave Ukraine, then don't make your church planting plan for Singapore, Make it something realistic. And so they kept it realistic. And all the red dots on this map are the places where they chose. They said, if I was to plant a church, here's where I would go. Here's how I would do it with the Lord's help. And I was really encouraged by this, to see just, the scope of things all across Ukraine, Poland and Germany, and the fact that even in Ukraine, we've got several in the west, where it's safe and stable, and several, even more in the east, where it's not safe and not stable. And yet our students were saying, I would go there. And one of those red dots is in Kherson, which is in the news a lot, a city that's right on the front, right across the river from Russian-occupied territory. And it's being bombarded daily. And one of my students said, I would go there. And then one of those red dots in the furthest to the east is inside of Russian-occupied territory. People told me and Denise, you're so brave for going over to Slovakia and working with Ukraine during the war. And I'm like, it's not very brave. That's brave. A student saying, I would go plant a church in Russian-occupied territory. And it's his hometown. That's why he picked it. So I was really encouraged by that. This is what our work looks like at other times. This is just our faculty and staff meeting. We have those every couple weeks. And like I said, Brandon and I have been charting the course for this sort of new UBI 2.0, we've called it sometimes. We've reduced it from a 24-month to an 18-month program, and that makes it possible for us to offer a 6-month internship at the end, so that we're not just educating students and then saying, okay, go do whatever you want, good luck, but we're providing an internship where they can go use the head knowledge that they've been gaining out on the field, working with somebody who's already there, and the responsibilities are not all on the student's shoulders. They can kind of work under somebody who's already there working. We've added a lot more emphasis on spiritual formation throughout the whole 18 months, so that it's not just a bunch of head knowledge without developing your prayer life and your relationship with God, your sense of accountability to brothers and sisters, all those things that are part of a healthy spiritual walk. We didn't want a lopsided graduate who has all this Bible knowledge but has languished in their relationship with God and with the church. And we're adding mentors who will help the students throughout the process, not faculty, but graduates mostly who would check in with the students once a week and just say, how are you doing? How can I pray for you? Any questions I can answer for you? Somebody who's walked the walk that they're doing recently. The whole thing is going to continue to be online. That's our only option right now. We have a few students in Kyiv. We still have a facility in Kyiv. We have one instructor still in Kyiv, but everybody else is everywhere else. And so we cannot do classroom education right now. So the whole thing's online, and that's a big part of the work I'll be doing this coming year. In the process, we also created a new logo, so that's our new logo. This is my last picture. It's most recently, and just I think the weekend before we left for this trip, Brandon and I went into Ukraine and met, this is one of our graduates, Sergey. We met him in Ukraine to deliver some funding for humanitarian work that UBI is doing, because in spite of technology, one of the most efficient ways to get large sums of money into Ukraine is to carry it yourself. And so Brandon and I went and did that so that we could continue to do the humanitarian work that UBI is doing inside of Ukraine. What's next? Well, first, Malachi's starting AIM. He's not here this morning. He's in AIM. It's weird. So that's him, and we're super proud of him. He's a great guy, ready for AIM, and we're excited about the experience he's having. That's him leading the Lord's Supper in Slovakia. So he's starting AIM. We're support raising. We started this trip realizing that the cost of living in Slovakia is higher than we expected, and our budget was about $1,100 more than the monthly support we had coming in. And so we've been mentioning this everywhere we go, looking for additional partners or partners that we already have who might be willing to increase what they do. And that it was $1,174 per month that we were short. The Lord has provided 700 of that already, so we're just short 474 a month at the moment. We're returning to Slovakia on Wednesday. So we leave here Tuesday, drive to Dallas, and fly out on Wednesday, and begin the new year for UBI. How you can help is to pray for us, and pray for our work, pray for Ukraine, pray for our students, pray for this war to end. And I'm realizing part of my job here on this trip is to testify that this war is real. Okay, if you don't trust your own news media, then listen to me telling you it's real, it's happening, it's awful, and Ukraine needs our help. Please pray for us, and pray specifically for us to have more inroads to develop relationships with the Slovak people around us in our lives, church members and neighbors, etc. So that's all. No time for questions. I saw that coming. So anyway, come to me afterwards if you have questions. Thank you.